on Cameroon's elections process, the stakes, risks, and opportunities. And we're very, very honored to have with us today Kah Walla, who I'll introduce in just a moment. First of all, I want to let you know that we will be webcasting today's proceedings. So when we get to the question and answer interchange, please wait for a microphone to come to you and identify yourself, because there'll be a lot of people out there watching you. As we all know, elections are coming up in Cameroon in this coming year. There'll be the fourth election since I think multi-party elections were allowed in the country in 1990. But by the same token, the same president has been there since 1982. So there's a lot of suspicions about the commitment of the ruling elite to democracy, and then a lot of issues around the Electoral Commission, Elecom, and other issues. We have with us today someone to talk about it who has now got a very firm interest in what occurs there.
Rather.
Kah has declared her candidacy for the president, and she will be. She is the first woman to run for president in Cameroon, and should she be elected, would be the second woman to be president in the continent. So that's very exciting. You have her bios before you, so I won't really read through that very much. She has actually got a long history of involvement on the business side as well, and you might want to talk a little bit today about economy and other things too, for those who are broadly interested in how things are in Cameroon. It's a country that's not followed that closely here in the United States, I think. For all of the crisis points of Sudan and Eastern DRC and Somalia and the headline grabbers like Zimbabwe and South Africa, we don't get much attention to a smaller country like Cameroon, where I equate it to kind of the situation in Niger. Things seem to bumble along, and there's not a real crisis, so no one pays any attention until the crisis comes. So let's see if we can get ahead of the crisis.
Exactly.
And hear some insights from you. So I turn it over to you to give a presentation for as you will, and then our custom is, of course, to have questions and answers and interchange with the audience afterwards.
Okay, great. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much to the Wilson Center for hosting this event. And I think Steve has precisely set the tone in the objective of being here, is that for once I think we have the warning signals of a potential crisis. We have some analysis being done, and we have the opportunity to act before the actual crisis occurs. And so I will be speaking this afternoon on our elections, what are some of the key stakes in this election, the risks, but also the opportunities that it presents. I'll start off, do I have to turn around?
No.
Okay, I can just, oh great. Okay, probably everybody in the room knows a little bit about Cameroon, but I will situate you a little bit. So we are about 19.4 million people in Central Africa. Independence for Cameroon was January 1960 for the French-speaking part of Cameroon, and 1st of October 1961 for the English-speaking part of Cameroon, which had been ruled with Nigeria. For the last 50 years, we've had just two presidents, a little bit embarrassing, but that's the case. The first one was there for 22 years, and the current president has been in place for 28 years. We had multi-party politics before independence, so very strong political activity before independence. Cameroon is known to be the country that led in sub-Saharan Africa the fight for independence, and it was rather violent in Cameroon. In 1960, we obtained independence, and I'll talk a little bit later about the we generally say we obtain independence, sort of, and we'll talk about why a little later. It's important to know that in 1962, President Ahidjo at the time took an ordinance that prohibited all political debate in Cameroon, all political association. And this is key for Cameroon and marks our history and our current situation, because as a country we were an English-speaking state and a French-speaking state coming together to form one country, and we were still, 1st of October 1961 to 1962, we're still in that state of discussing, well, how do we really do this? What are the laws? What are the changes we make? What are the things we do to become really one country? Now, Ahidjo's ordinance was not targeting so much the Anglophones as he was targeting the Union des Populations Camerounaises, which was the UPC, which was the political party that had actually fought for independence. Ahidjo made a deal with the French, and they killed off most of the nationalists who were fighting for independence in collusion between Ahidjo and the French. And so the 62 ordinance was really targeting the UPC, which was still very active in the country at the time. The last of the UPC nationalists was killed in 1972. So, but in targeting the UPC, he cut off all political debate in the country. And so for the Anglophone, Francophone coming together, it just sort of ended, and there was no further discussion, there was no further political debate about how this whole mechanism would work, and hence the Anglophone discomfort till today. There's never been that dialogue, just never took place again up till date. We saw a return to multi-party politics in 1990, which Cameroonians fought for. People gave their lives for in the early 1990s. And once again, we have a feeling of we got multi-party democracy, sort of. So as mentioned, 1992, 1997, and 2004, we've had presidential elections. Important to note that in 1996, we adopted a constitution that would limit presidential terms to 5 years, renewable once. So normally Paul Biya was supposed to have his final term in 2009. In 2008, he initiated a constitutional change in order to remove the term limits and to extend the mandate to 7 years. He succeeded in doing that in spite of very strong protests in the country. In February 2008, there were street protests in Cameroon in over 7 of the 10 major cities, and it's estimated that about 200 people lost their lives during those protests. So what are the stakes for us going into these 2011 elections? I've separated them out into the political stakes, the economic stakes, and the social stakes. So we have this unfinished political business from the independence, 1950s to 1960s, where the party that was the popular party, which was the People's Party, they were actually prohibited from participating in the elections under the deal that Ahidjo made with the French. And they were advocating for complete independence, political, economic, cultural independence. So this independence sort of got interrupted. So we got an administrative independence, but we did not get a real change in the system. And Cameroon till today is governed very much by the colonial system. We've just changed the people who are there. And so that feeling of we've not quite achieved independence is still a very strong political stake in Cameroon. In the early 1990s, we fought for multi-party politics, had a presidential election in 1992, which the large majority of Cameroonians feel was won by the opposition. The Supreme Court took about 3 weeks to announce the election results, and when they did, they announced for Paul Biya, for the party in power. Once again, people, the Biya regime till date is considered as not legitimate because these elections were never accepted as being actually the results of what had happened on the ground. And so there is that sense of we got multi-party politics in principle, but almost not in fact, because also the Biya regime, the 1992 elections, I was very fortunate. I lived in this city and going to school at Howard University up until December of 1989. And I arrived home in this wave of change that was taking over Cameroon. And it was a very, very exciting and wonderful time because people really invested themselves and their time, their energy into making this change happen. After 1992, where the government was very, very threatened by the street, basically, they proceeded to clamp down using various means, both repressive means and various forms of corruption to kill off any kind of strong opposition. In 1997, the 1997 elections, municipal and legislative, the opposition actually had a majority in parliament. In order to get the voices that he needed to maintain the majority, Paul Biya made a deal, which is Cameroonians believe that it was a monetary deal with one of the political parties in order to get the 6 voices that he needed to maintain his parliamentary majority. After that, numerous opposition leaders have been bought off either with money or with positions in the government. And so the opposition has been seriously weakened over the last 20 years. Another aspect that's interesting in Cameroon, there's an apparent political and media freedom and also a freedom of expression. So as an opposition leader, I'm on the television all the time, in the newspapers, criticizing the government, criticizing Paul Biya in person, and I don't get arrested. But this apparent freedom, when you read the Cameroonian newspapers, you're like, wow, this is really freedom of expression in this country. But that's coupled with a sporadic and not very logical repression. So you'll have people and media organs saying, whatever their opinion or analysis is for 3 years, nothing will happen to anybody. And then one morning, a media station will get shut down or a political leader will get arrested. And nobody can really understand why. What did they do worse than what everybody else was doing or what they had been doing for the last 3 years? Well, this kind of sporadic repression works very well because then nobody knows where the line is, and so everybody steps back because you're not quite sure what it is that gets you in trouble, and so it's a rather effective way of keeping people in check. So those are the political stakes. Now, all of this has resulted in a lack of faith by the population in the political process and a progressive lack of engagement. One of the things that is interesting is that from 1970, when we used to have, 1970 was the days of the one-party state, voting was obligatory, to today, we have maintained about the same number of voters. So in 1970, it was 3.2 million voters, and in the last elections in 2007, it was 3.5 million voters. The population has practically doubled in that space of time. So people do not see the political process as a conduit for resolving whatever problem they have, whether it's economic development, and so there's a real divorce between people and the political process. Is there somebody here from the International Crisis Group? No? I think... Okay. The International Crisis Group has an excellent report they put out in May of this year called Cameroon Fragile State, ? And I think their opening statement really summarizes is Cameroon's apparent stability in a turbulent region cannot be taken for granted. The co-option of elites through the distribution of state largesse and the immigration of many educated young people provide a certain safety valve for tensions, but the failure of reform and continued poor governance mean people no longer believe in the rule of law or peaceful political change. So this is a this is the state of mind of a significant portion of Cameroonians. They just don't believe in this political process, and they're not sure that we can do this peacefully through the ballot box. The economic stakes are that we have had, in spite of being a country that is enormously rich in resources, we've had stagnant economic growth for the last 10 years. We've been unable to cross the 6% bar, whereas almost all the economists agree that we need double-digit growth to actually get out of poverty. The government, after having double-digit growth as an objective for about 5 years, in the last plan that they put out, just completely abandoned it, and they're hoping to have 5.5% for the next 10 years. There's the inability to implement our potential of becoming Central Africa's regional economic engine. This is what we are naturally. This is the country that should be leading the region, that should be pulling the region, because it is Central Africa's breadbasket. We supply food to the 7 countries that we border with. We have a huge market next door with Nigeria. We have a huge market to the south with Congo. But we make it very, very difficult to trade agriculturally with us. We almost oblige people to it's almost clandestine the way they come in. They come in through the creeks at night, and it's very much as if they're smuggling food out of the country and carrying out trade in this manner. Simply because we've made the customs procedures and the infrastructure so difficult to get around. Cameroon is the natural gateway to the Gulf of Guinea. Everybody knows what the geostrategic importance of that region is to the world today. And we are the country that has both the infrastructure and the economy that should be the landing point for everybody who wants to do business in that region. Our unique colonial history also means that we are bilingual, French and English, and therefore able to communicate with all of our neighbors. Also, we should be Central Africa's entrepreneurial hub. Cameroon is a very, very strong entrepreneurial country. People are naturally drawn to starting their own businesses and creating their own jobs. But we'll see a little bit later, we make it very, very difficult for them to do so. Another stake is that we have been unable to reduce poverty. From 2001 to 2007, by the government's own statistics, we had a 0.1 percentage point reduction of poverty, compared to the 10 years before where we had been able to reduce poverty by about 8 percentage points. So much of this is due to this inability to tap into the entrepreneurial potential. 89% of jobs in Cameroon are in the informal sector. And our inability to carry out structural economic reforms. So in 2007, we were 152 out of 175 economies ranked by the Doing Business report of the World Bank. And in 2011, sorry, I forgot to put the year there, 2011, we're 168 out of 183. So we're basically standing still, or actually moving back on the Doing Business index, primarily because we're not doing anything and other countries are reforming. So that's one of the cases. Also, Cameroon is an extremely corrupt country. I've stopped keeping track of where we are on the Transparency International Index. We've been number one at least twice, and I think right now we're fourth or fifth, something like that. So highly corrupt, and corruption, of course, affecting the economy very strongly. On the social level, 40% of our population lives with 738 francs CFA per day. These are the government's own statistics, once again. So about $1.25 a day. 1 out of 2 Cameroonians does not have access to electricity in a country that has the potential. Between Cameroon and the DRC, we have the potential to electrify all of Africa. We have a huge hydro potential in these two countries. So this is a country that not only should be providing electricity to everybody in its own country, but should be exporting energy to its neighbors. It's just to tell you where the problem is. It's really in the management. In Songlulu, which is one of our biggest dams, half of Songlulu does not have electricity. They're providing it to the rest of the country, and no provision has been made to distribute it to the people who live in that town. Less than 1 out of 2 Cameroonians has access to drinking water, and 2 out of 3 Cameroonians do not have access to a decent toilet. In this year, about 500 Cameroonians died of cholera, precisely in the regions where we have the most problems with access to decent toilets. This, by the way, is an 8 percentage point drop since 2001. So it tells you which direction we're going in. So between the poverty and the poor respect for the basic rule of law, crime is on the increase, and we are seeing very strong deterioration of social organization. So parents have a very difficult time keeping their families together and keeping kids in line, because they can't provide the basic needs of these children. So we are seeing things like prostitution at a very early age for young women, young men going into various criminal activities, because that basic family structure, the parents can't hold it together because they don't have the economics to be able to do so. And we also have this large population of unemployed but educated young people. Cameroon has a very high literacy rate in comparison to most African countries. I think we're number 3 or number 4 in sub-Saharan Africa. We have a 68% literacy rate across the board, with, I think, men being about 73% and women 59% or so. And we have 50% of our population that's under 20 years old. So very young population, educated, and they don't have anything to do. We also have our historical divides, our Anglophone-Francophone divide. We do have a secessionist movement in Cameroon amongst the Anglophones, and it gains ground. It's gaining ground because it can stand on all of these economic and social difficulties. Now, what the secessionist movement does is it forgets to tell the Anglophones that everybody else in the country is suffering from these same problems. It's presented as if we're suffering from this because we're Anglophones and we're being marginalized in the country. We have our north-south divide. When Biya came to power in 1982, he was highly acclaimed. I remember going to a reception the first time he came here to the United States. I was here as a student. We were all looking forward to his new regime of democratization. He called it rigor in terms of management and so on. 2 years later, there was a coup attempt generally considered to have been led by Ahijo loyalists. And so these were northerners Biya's from the southern part of the country. These were northerners that led the coup attempt. It was foiled at the presidency, but thereafter there was a very, very strong repression of northerners. And so there is that divide that still exists. And on top of that are ethnic differences. So the Biya regime has done what most not very legitimate regimes do, which is to use ethnic divisions as a political base. And so under Biya, we saw the creation of what we call the Anglo-Beti divide. So there had never been a Beti ethnic group to date. And what he did to consolidate his power was to remind all the ethnic groups from his province and from the two provinces that are adjacent, the center and the south, that they come from one ethnic root. And he created this Beti group, which has exceptional favor in terms of political posts in the army and so on and so forth. He also created the Anglo-Bami, grouping together the Northwesterners from where the opposition was coming with the Bamilekes, who have ethnic similarity, and created the Anglo-Bami group and basically told the Betis, these Anglo-Bamis are coming to get you as a people. That feeling is somewhat dissipated now. This was very, very strong in the early 90s. This was his response to the opposition coming up very strongly. Somewhat dissipated, but it's there. It's still underlying there. So those are the stakes. What are the risks? I had a hard time distinguishing necessarily between the two of those preparing, is that we do risk a total breakdown of the political system. If people just continue to not engage in this system. In 2007, we had 9 million potential voters, and 3.5 million of them participated in the election. Biya was elected by 2.2 million voters. So the percentage of people who participate in the political process gets lower and lower every elections. We also see the risk of groups deciding that, well, if you can't bring about change peacefully through the electoral process, then you should go for violence. I can tell you that since I declared my candidacy, I've been approached seriously by two groups that inform me that given that my leadership has popular support and people behind it, they think that I should join them in using violence. They said, you're never going to make it through the electoral system. And so given the fact that you do have popular support, what you should do with it is to join an armed movement. So there are people out there considering that as a potential means of bringing about change in Cameroon. It's also a question that comes up in public discussion and debate all the time. in Cameroon and outside Cameroon. Since I've been here, I've been meeting with the diaspora, and people in public forums will just say, this is not going to work, through peaceful means. We need to consider violent means. There is also the risk of social protest, increased social protest, like we saw in 2008, leading to violence, because the regime will try to contain this kind of protests with violence. It's the only way they know how to deal with this. And so that's also a potential risk. Economically, we're risking continued stagnation because they just will not make the reforms that are necessary to take the economy off the ground. This, of course, will continue to lead to poverty, increased poverty, and we may see a total breakdown of the economic structure as the economy gets more and more informal. And I could add in there more and more corrupt. So the economic systems they're still there today, but they're being bypassed by corruption, by the informal system. And if this increases, then they just won't exist at a certain point in time. Socially, as I've mentioned, the secessionist movement may continue to gain ground. It's an extreme movement based on complete emotion. They don't bother with too many facts. They just whip up the emotion of Anglophones being marginalized and Anglophones having not been respected in this system and not being able to be part of this country, and the only solution is to separate. Now, there is historical fact, and there are historical discriminations against Anglophones. There is an Anglophone problem in Cameroon, but the secessionist movement's tendency is to just take a little piece of that and wrap it around an enormous amount of emotion. And we're looking also at a possibility of total breakdown of the social fabric, with the family units no longer being able to contain the young people, with the traditional systems no longer being able to put any kind of order into the society, and possible heightened ethnic tensions. The tendency, I think, in these situations where systems and norms are kind of dissipating is that people hang on to their fundamental identity. So the one thing I'm sure of is my ethnic group, since everything else seems to be falling apart around me. And I think, of course, all around the world we see this extremism that is created in these kinds of situations. Also, the increased inability to provide basic social services. If we keep regressing in terms of access to water, access to electricity, we will, of course, this population is continuing to grow. And if we don't have systems that can provide these services, then we're in trouble. So there is, in my opinion, I feel a very strong sense of urgency about my country. There is potential for conflict in Cameroon. And I have a lot of fear about that conflict because there are so many possibilities for division that I think it would be total chaos. We would have Anglophones against Francophones. In the Anglophone community, you have the Southwesterners against the Northwesterners. We would have Anglos against Bétis, Anglo-Bamis against Bétis. We would have Northerners against Southerners. It would be, there's so many ways that you can split this thing that I think it would be very, very difficult to even understand who's fighting whom and about what. If this were to occur. So, after all that, yes, I do still feel that there is opportunity. And And I think that the opportunity is in these elections in 2011. And as free and as transparent and as effectively organized as we can make them, we will be able to negotiate this corner if we can do this. If we cannot, everything that I've said, I think, really is multiplied by several factors. So, what does the electoral process look like in Cameroon? We have several key institutions. ELECAM, which is Elections Cameroon, is the principal body that is in charge of managing elections. Then we have the Ministry of Territorial Administration and Decentralization. We have what is supposed to be the Constitutional Council. It has not been put into place. It exists in the Constitution, but has not been put into place. So that role is currently being played by the Supreme Court. The political parties, of course, the media, civil society, which has become very, very active for these particular elections. Not only are they engaging in the political process, but there are more than one candidate coming from the civil society, and, of course, the international community. ELECAM is in charge of managing the National Electoral Register, examining candidacy files, publishing the electoral rolls, and rendering public the trends of the election's outcome. This should be sending a red flag around the room, considering what we've just witnessed in Côte d'Ivoire, because ELECAM does not pronounce the results, it publishes the trends. It then transmits the minutes of the various polling stations to the Constitutional Council, played by the Supreme Court, that will pronounce the results. It also materially organizes the polls, hears any claims, and organizes consultations with the various actors. The other organs, the ministry will participate upon request of ELECAM. This is what the law says. The reality is that the ministry has more resources and is more present nationally than ELECAM, so probably has an upper hand in terms of the organization. The minister happens to be a member of the Central Committee of the ruling party. The Supreme Court receives the candidacy files, will proclaim the results of the election, and hears pre- and post-electoral claims. The political parties present candidates, participate in the electoral process after being summoned by ELECAM. Right now, the primary opposition party, the Social Democratic Front, which I belonged to until the 23rd of October when I announced my candidacy, has decided not to cooperate with ELECAM. What this means is they are currently not on the commissions for voter registration. This is really, in my opinion, too bad. It's one of the key reasons that I left the party, because the people who are going in to register to vote, if they have trouble registering, or if they feel that the registration process is not being carried out properly, they don't have anybody to go to for recourse to help them with their recourse. The media, as I've explained, is fairly free. And the very nice thing for us candidates in Cameroon is media time is virtually free. There are so many political shows and political discussions on the television, radio, and so on, that we do get a lot of media time that we don't have to pay for. Civil society is very active right now in voter mobilization and in electoral reform. The international community is traditionally carries out election observation. The UNDP has taken the lead in Cameroon within the diplomatic community, in Cameroon for providing technical assistance to Elecam. One of the things that needs to happen is that the international community needs to be a lot more transparent to all of the other actors with regard to what it is precisely they're doing with the government. We've been unable to get information as to, what is exactly in their agreement with the government. What precise points are they providing technical assistance on? We've been unable to get information as how much money. And when you talk to people from the international community in Yaoundé, they will tell you we're having a lot of difficulty, but on what? And what is late and what is not happening that should be happening is not structured public information that is going out. So our determining factors are going to be from now until the elections, our ability to get Elecam to be as fair and as transparent as possible and technically competent. I'll come back to that point a little later. And then post-elections will be the huge challenge of making sure that the results that come from the ground are the results that are pronounced as the election results. Cameroon has gone through this in 1992. And like I said, the Côte d'Ivoire situation, right now Cameroonians are obsessed with the Côte d'Ivoire situation because we kind of feel like, oh my goodness, this could be happening to us. So that's, let me just, now this is just my opinion that I believe that the only thing that ever brings down undemocratic systems sustainably is the people themselves, is their ability to organize themselves and to act in a determined manner. And so it's going to be our ability as Cameroonians to weigh into this system and tilt the system in our favor. Key elements that we're interested in is reconstituting the voters list. We would like the government to start from scratch and to use technology. Biometric technology. This, we feel, should be a standard. Almost every country around the world is using this technology. Guinea-Conakry used it, Côte d'Ivoire used it, Congo used it. It's not understandable why Cameroon is not using this. This is one of the means to eliminate fraud. It would also permit the immediate production of voters' registration cards. Right now, as a Cameroonian, you have to go back and forth to the registration center about 4 times to register. You come back to get your card. You come back to find out what polling station you're going to vote at. So it's a very cumbersome process for people who don't have a lot of money to pay for that transportation back and forth. The other thing that we are looking at is the use of a single ballot. Cameroon still uses multiple ballots. Multiple ballots favor systems where people are being paid to vote for one party, because you keep the ballots of the parties that you didn't vote for, and you go to the center where you get paid and you prove that you voted for this party, and here are the ballots of the other parties which I did not vote for. The single ballot would eliminate that. We are also asking for the immediate production of an electoral calendar. I'm a candidate who does not know exactly on what day the elections will take place. There's a legal window, but the current law allows the president to call the electoral body 30 days before the elections. So that's all, right now by law, that would be all the notice that we would get as the other actors in the process. Also, we would like deadlines for producing the voters' cards, for polling stations, for publishing the electoral roll, and so on. I'll skip this one. So, and just go to basically what we feel that the international community can do is to really insist on these technical reforms. I skipped over the political reforms. There are political reforms, but if the international community goes there, the country will say, national sovereignty. You're not supposed to be in our business telling us who should be on our commissions and so on and so forth. The technical reforms, there's no excuse, especially if the international community is paying for a part of this process. Then we think that they can insist on obtaining at least the use of biometric technology and things like single ballot and so on. Another element is to insist upon and to develop an early warning system for the safety and security of all the actors in the process. It is dangerous in Cameroon to be involved in the political process, either as a candidate or as a member of an electoral commission that wants to really stand up for things to be fair and transparent. And I think all of us should have a mechanism of being able to say to the rest of the world, I'm in trouble, I'm afraid for my security. And it would also mean supporting programs and projects that promote the engagement of Cameroonians into the electoral process. And a couple of those that I know about, because one of the things I'm also involved in is an apolitical a nonpartisan association called Cameroon Discussed, which involves, there are about 3 presidential candidates in the association and over 6 political parties in the association, and we are all advocating for a better electoral system. And some of the projects include Wave of Women, which is targeting women as voters, as candidates, and as polling agents. Youth in Democracy is about the same thing, targeting people who are 30 years old and younger. Our vote counts. People with disabilities have been very, very involved in the electoral process this time, and we've been working with them for over a year. They want to make sure as many of them are registered to vote as possible. I'm 20, I vote. 20 is the voting age, and so it's targeting that first-time voter. Enfant de la Révolution is with a rap artist in Cameroon called Valsero. It's concept similar to Rock the Vote that you had here, using rap concerts to register people. The other elements, technical assistance, I've mentioned. The other point to bring up, there is a project called Election Legal Aid, which is actually being put into place by lawyers and various people in the legal profession who are coming together to volunteer their time to be able to provide legal assistance pre, during, and post election, because one of the things that happen is people just don't know the law and they don't have recourse. So being able to, the objective is for them to be able to have a hotline that people can call and say, this is what is happening, what does the law say, and so on. We Protect is targeting having polling agents in every polling station. There are 22,000 polling stations in Cameroon, or at least they were. The last election, we don't know what it will be this time. So it means mobilizing about 100,000 people to be in those polling stations on voting day. And finally, USHID, some of you may have heard about, is a project which several associations and NGOs are working on with the U.S. Embassy. And it is using technology to be able to capture and communicate the results of the elections independently of ELECAM. Okay. And I think that's it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Seldom do we get such a comprehensive overview to start with. Lots of information to digest, lots of things to talk about. So let's open it to the floor. This is very informal. Remember to wait for the microphone. Paul, right up here is our first hand. If you can get it up here, identify yourself, speak plainly, clearly, and ask a question.
John Harbison, Johns Hopkins SAIS, and a member of the Advisory Council here at the Wilson Center. Assuming that you get elected, that seems like the least of your problems, is what you do the day after and how you do it. And specifically, it seems to me that the countries that have done the best in terms of real democratization are the ones that have had some kind of national conference, some kind of constitutional process before elections. Benin and Mali especially, to some extent Ghana, certainly Southern Africa. So what's your post-election strategy? In a few words, 24 words or less.
Well, I think you've definitely hit at least one major part of it. The only reason we're not holding out for a constitutional conference or a referendum or something before elections is we're not going to get it from Biya. He's clearly demonstrated that over the last couple of decades. So on my political program is definitely constitutional reform. As Cameroon is actually dancing between two constitutions. So we have this 1996 constitution, and every time we're confronted with something that has not been implemented from that, then we go back to the old constitution and say, yeah, let's just use what the old one provides, and that's an extremely what can we call it, uncertain place for a nation to be. So constitutional and institutional reform is very big on my political program. That actually has the three elements I have are taking back our power. So that's the constitutional institutional reform, transforming our leadership, which is dealing with our questions of national identity, and our economic strength regionally. And thirdly, building new systems which will enable us to deliver basic services to the population. Key to that in my concept of government is decentralization. One of the key things that is really, really wrong with our system is all of this power and resources that are concentrated in the central government.
Okay.
My name's Ralph Whittam. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer in Adamawa province. I'm wondering, I understand you speak excellent English and French. Do you speak full day? And what are you doing between now and the election to campaign to overcome all those wedge issues that exist in Cameroon, the ethnic and political differences? How do you persuade people?
Okay. No, I don't speak Fulfulde. I do speak fluent English and fluent French and fluent Pidgin. My entire campaign strategy is grassroots based. When I go back in January, I'm spending the entire month of January in the Adamawa, the North, and the extreme North provinces. And our experience so far is that the only way to persuade Cameroonians is to get them together and discuss these issues and get them to begin to see this opportunity, for them to understand that, you know, if there's 9 million potential of us who can weigh in on this system, if 5.5 million of us stay out of the game, then we are allowing this system to perpetuate itself. Because you can fraud 10,000 votes, you can fraud 100,000. Frauding 1 million votes is already fairly difficult, and if it's 2 to 3 million, the margin, you really, no matter what your fraud system is, haven't got a chance. And so the opportunity is really in the numbers of Cameroonians who engage into this system and participate. And one of the things that we've also traditionally done is to work with people based on their economic and social needs. So we're not just coming in to talk to them about a political process. We're talking to them either as farmers, as market women and men, as you know what a bensikin is because you've lived in Cameroon, right? To the motorcycle taxi drivers. We're talking to all of these people and enabling them to see how the difficulties they face on a day-to-day basis making their living is linked to the political situation in the country and how they can engage and make a difference.
Osaige Masoge, I serve on the Wilson Council. My question is actually twofold. What do you perceive is the U.S. interest in Cameroon? Because Steve earlier on said that for the smaller countries, we tend not to focus on it, but what do you perceive the U.S. interest to be? And the flip side of that is, I think the pink elephant in the room is France. So how does France and how will France view your candidacy in that environment?
I think the U.S., interestingly in Cameroon today, the U.S. and the French interests almost balance each other out. The French have been our historic, traditional economic partners, and they are much more entrenched in the economy in terms of number of companies and so on. The U.S. has a huge interest in Cameroon right now between the Gulf of Guinea and the Chad-Cameroon pipeline. Those two, the one project, the Chad-Cameroon pipeline, made the U.S. Cameroon's number one economic partner. And so it's huge in terms of interest. And then, as I've mentioned, Cameroon is central to both doing business in the Gulf of Guinea and the security in the Gulf of Guinea. And so that's where the U.S. interests lie. And I think that not acting, if Cameroon gets to be an unstable country, and we're already seeing piracy in the Gulf of Guinea on the Cameroonian side. We're seeing hostage taking and so on. So if Cameroon gets any more unstable, this will really endanger the stability of the region, because we know what's happening on the Nigerian side, and encroaching into the Cameroon waters, it would really endanger that. The second, your second question, so I think the U.S. has a lot of interest to act now. And not wait for this situation to become a conflict situation. The other thing is that we as Cameroonians are looking for balancing our trade and business relationships. The relationships we have right now with France is unhealthy. Having one very, very strong partner that then can influence a lot of things politically and so on. So the agenda would be to, one, reform our business environment so that this country, which has enormous potential for this region, becomes a good place to do business in. And the discussions that I have had with the French, who are very reassured by the fact that I can speak French, they have centered around the idea of business environment reform, because we've become a difficult place for their businesses to do business in. The other thing is that we really need to build a new partnership. The experience that France is having in Côte d'Ivoire is this perception of France as being a country which negatively influences the democratic progress in a country, becomes very, very dangerous for French businesses and for French individuals who live in the country. And so the discussions we have had is my message to France is, this is really an opportunity for you to, again, act proactively before the situation degenerates into something that becomes dangerous for your citizens and dangerous for your businesses, you can act proactively and be on the right side of history. And it's good for Cameroon, but it's also good for you. So that's the relationship there.
Okay, right at the very end was the next hand I saw.
Al Milliken, AM Media. You had mentioned meeting with the diaspora, and I was curious your observations about them, I mean, particularly in the United States, the ones you've had contact with. And I have made friendships with some, more than one person from Cameroon. I one friend in particular that's invited me to some social events, and I was really struck significantly at these. I mean, at some like holiday party and some other gatherings, someone was profiting maybe a little more than I thought they rightfully should, as far as what they were charging for alcohol and refreshments. But then also what I thought, it was actually significant when someone was dying. It didn't really matter. You didn't necessarily know that person at all. I mean, and you may have very slight contact with that person, but like there was an obligation for everyone to come together, and go well into the night. And actually, if there was any reason you couldn't participate in that, like you were really obligated to pay a significant financial amount. And I know that my one friend in particular really felt a bit coerced about that. But I'm just thinking a network like that could really be very effective politically. I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, those are our traditional social security systems, by the way, is that traditionally, because we don't have a formal social security system, we contribute for birth, we contribute for death, we contribute for marriage. And there is a sort of very strong social obligation to do that, because if that strong obligation is not there, then the system falls apart. So you find Cameroonians, it even tends to become stronger when they're not at home, because there's a small number of them and they have to come together. But I'm actually here on their demand. I was coming to New York. I participated in the Economist World in 2011 conference, and when people found out I was coming, I started getting calls saying, well, can you come to Boston? Can you come to D.C.? And can you come to... And I'm in the middle of a 6-city tour, entirely organized and paid for by the diaspora. And so they are a force, and that's the reason I'm bothering to spend time and go around and talk to them. They influence things not only financially in Cameroon, they influence thought a lot in Cameroon, and so they are significant. Unfortunately, they cannot vote by Cameroonian law, and that's one of the political points that that is on our list for electoral reform.
Does the diaspora have a political profile? And I'm asking that because in the cases of Ethiopia, Eritrea, other diasporas were normally in opposition to ruling groups.
The ruling group, the ruling regime does have some representation here, but the large majority would be, it's not by accident that we're not allowing them to vote. For the most part, they are opposition. There are a lot of political refugees. There are a lot of people who were involved in the fight for multi-party democracy in the early 90s and who had to flee the country for their security.
Okay.
So,
The next hand I saw was right over here, Paul. Yeah.
My name is Abigail Greenleaf. I was a Peace Corps volunteer also in Adamawa province. I'm wondering where your support comes from in Cameroon, what provinces, what areas, the age groups, and then where do you see more support coming from? Because there's you have your lifers that have been with Paul Biya that are never going to change, and then being a woman, I think a lot of people in certain areas are going to be closed. So those are my two questions.
So maybe Adamawa province. We have 3 northern provinces in Cameroon: Adamawa North and Extreme North. And though the Muslims are not the majority in those provinces, numerically speaking, the Muslim influence is very, very strong. It's the cultural majority, if you like, and so that I think that question is coming from there. My political base is Douala. I am an elected official in the Douala City Council. So my greatest strength is probably coming from Douala. Now, Douala is the largest city in Cameroon. It is also the home of the opposition in Cameroon. I have worked in 9 out of the 10 provinces in Cameroon, so have fairly good experience, especially with farmer populations in the urban areas, a lot of the different segments of the informal economy. That is where that's the group that I have a very strong appeal to. The other thing is age groups. It's interesting. I have a very strong appeal to the under 30s and the questions of she's a woman. Not only am I a woman, I'm not married and I don't have kids. And those questions to that age group, they do not care. They want change. They feel like I look like change, I sound like change, and they are very strongly on board for the campaign. I also have an appeal in the over 60s, which is I was very surprised at. But they have a feeling, I think, of wanting something to happen before the end of their lives, and wanting something to change in this country. And there's a sort of, I sense from them a sort of pride, like this is our daughter and she's, doing what she is supposed to be doing. The toughest group is the group that looks just like me, is the group that's between 40 and 50 years old, that's very well educated, that's middle to upper class. Of course, they have stakes in the system. So, yeah. In the northern provinces, we have begun a lot of groundwork with northerners who are working in Yaoundé and Douala. People leave the north and come to the cities to work, and they usually are working very menial jobs as guards and house help and so on. I have a very strong base in that population. Also, the fishermen from the north who come down to the south is a group we've been working with for a couple of years. And they are right now, as we speak, my advance team to the 3 northern provinces before I come. Women are very, very excited about my candidacy. We have a big challenge to translate that excitement into action. But it's already great that they are interested in the political process.
Can I follow that up with just sort of broadening out? You said the SDF had dropped out. The question is, what's your party base? What other parties are contesting? Is indeed contesting again? Biya obviously is. Are there other viable candidates?
Okay. The SDF has not dropped out per se. They have an interesting position. Their position is that they will not. In fact, their position is that the country will not go to elections with Elecam in its present dispensation. Frundi has not declared his candidacy. The primaries for the SDF were postponed from October this year to February, and they have been postponed again to April. So I'm not quite sure why, and it seems very much of a sort of waiting strategy on the part of the SCF that I'm not quite sure why. Biya has not yet declared, but I would be very surprised if he went through all that trouble of changing the Constitution and then he didn't run. And perhaps, I don't know if everybody knows, but Frundi and Biya met for the first time this past week, for the first time in 20 years, for the first time ever, since both have been on the scene. My political platform is not yet decided. I have not created a new political party. I am in dialogue and discussion with about 12 political parties right now. My objective would be that we create a unified force that would enter these elections with opposition parties that have commonalities in terms of ideology, in terms of approach to the elections, and in terms of our political platform. That's a very slow and painstaking process that we are going through. I'm very happy in the sense that I declared less than 2 months ago. These 12 parties have spontaneously come towards us, and it's increasing as we go along. And so hopefully we will be able to come to some kind of an agreement. Our estimation in our timeline is we're giving it about another 8 weeks, so probably till about the end of February to make a final decision on that.
It's a partial follow-up to that. I know you don't know the dates yet, and we only have a 30-day sort of drop line for when the president declares the election, but any sense of when it'll happen? I mean, if you have primaries going through, is it going to be mid-year, late year?
Oh, we do. There is a legal window.
Okay.
There is a legal window which is from the 14th of September to the 16th of October, is when by law he should call the elections. Now, he has rarely respected that legal window. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I actually see a hand over here that's new, so let's go with the newbie first.
Hi, Danny Quinn. I was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Bafoussam. What do you see the RDCPs? What's their approach coming into the election? What do you think their strategies will be? You said Paul Biya hasn't officially declared yet, but over the next year, leading up until September, what do you think some of their strategies will be?
Oh, they're on the field. They're working already quite hard. Paul Biya's traditional strategy has been he doesn't campaign. He doesn't go out to campaign. He has an entire government to do that for him, and that's what has already happened. All the ministers and high-ranking officials have been deployed to go out on the field, supposedly to tell people to go out and register to vote. But they're clearly carrying the CPDM colors when they do that, and so on. So they are continuing with their field strategy. It is also very much of a by the vote strategy. This past weekend when Biya was in Bamenda for the first time since 1985, he, by all reports, laid out very significant envelopes to all the traditional chiefs and high-ranking members of the Bamenda elite to ensure that he would have a respectable welcome, which he did get. That has been the traditional CPDM strategy, and that's what we're continuing to expect from them. He will probably, now, in Bamenda, he made a bilingual speech, which I immediately got calls and said, aha, see, you're influencing his approach already, because the fact that I am bilingual and have been communicating in both languages is a very strong point during this election. People are feeling like, wow, we could finally get a president that is really Cameroonian in the sense of being able to speak both languages. So I'm expecting that. I think that we will begin to see. I've been called by several high-ranking members of the CPDM, so I've been informed that I have been noticed. So I think we'll probably see them putting a little bit more pressure on our activities as they feel more and more threatened by that. Yeah.
So no one speaks German anymore.
You do still find a few people, 80 and over, who speak German.
Not a big constituency.
No.
Besides,
My question was actually a generational question. If I'm not mistaken, Biya is in his 70s right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
78.
Oh, okay.
he speaks German.
And if I'm not mistaken, you are in your 40s. But
45.
All right. So, even within the ruling party, what happens with that age gap?
Mm-hmm.
78 is a little bit closer to a particular conclusion that we're all going to face at one stage than is 45. So what is happening within the party, within the ruling party, in that gap of generations?
Yeah, I think the my candidacy is really waking up and generating a lot of excitement. I had a town hall here yesterday with Cameroonians who are very, very excited because of that generational factor. The entire political class in Cameroon, it's not just Biya, it's also Frundi, it's also Ndamjoya, it's also Mbuamasok. The entire political class in Cameroon is men who are 70 years and older. And there is this generation 40 to 60 practically who feels like if something doesn't happen now, we are just going to be a lost generation. We will never have exercised leadership. We will never have put to service. We are probably the best educated generation in Cameroon. After us, the educational system started going downhill. We were the generation that, for the majority, went around the world to study and still came back home. So it is a generation that's feeling very, very frustrated. Within the ruling party, I see two trends. There are those who are calling me up or contacting me covertly and saying, "Great job, just keep doing it. It's gonna work. Just keep doing what you're doing." And then there are the party conservatives, because the party conservatives in that generation are also very strong. Once again, very well educated, very well, very savvy, and so they are feeling very threatened and are showing very strong resistance to my candidacy. So there's two very clear trends. More women tend to be in the first trend. Yeah.
We only have time for one more question. I'm going to take it. At 4 o'clock, we'll cut off of our video streaming, so it's not that we have to leave the room. But I was very, very involved in a lot of democracy, governance, elections, procedures through Africa over the last 25, 30 years. And one of the things that we did a lot of was training of elections monitors, local monitors, polling officials, as well as poll workers, and et cetera. And to good effect in countries like Benin in the 90s and the mid-90s and late 90s and others. I see that you mentioned the We Protect focus, which is on that, as well as this very fascinating sounding USHIDE that you're working with the U.S. Embassy on in terms of reporting results. first of all, explain the latter a little bit more to us so we can understand that, because that sounds fascinating. But second of all, is there any resistance to this by the ruling elite, by the government? In my experience, I found that these are easy ways that the United States and other international groups and organizations as well can find to intervene in a constructive way. Training and helping with pulling materials and the like, but that often that's seen as a challenge to the ruling elite.
I think there has not been there's not much resistance to training polling agents and equipping them to work in polling stations. I ran for office in 2007. We carried out an extensive program on this, and I don't think it was. Yeah, you don't get much trouble for that. Of course, it cannot be clearly partisan. So your training would, I mean, if a particular association or NGO entered into partnership with a U.S. organization or the embassy or whatever, they're free to choose who comes to their training. But a U.S. organization or any other foreign organization could not be supporting directly, say, the SDF. And the Germans managed to with the socialists. The Germans have they have political foundations that are either, well, you do here as well, and so they have socialist political foundations which have solely supported the SDF in these kinds of activities. Ushaidi, I am hesitant to tell you any more about it because I don't know that much more about it. I know that it is. They are using mainly SMS, mainly cell phone technology, and the idea is to have people in every polling station who will be able to pronounce the results and say these are the results. Now, I have to say that
that would depend upon a physical and transparent count at the polling station.
At the polling station. Well, the at the polling stations, the counts are fairly transparent. If there is proper representation at that polling station, there's a good chance that you'll have a correct count. The fraud actually happens between the polling station and the when the results are being transmitted to and then that's where they get switched along the way and they get changed and things like that. And so that is the whole idea behind that, is that if we are having the results directly from the polling stations, then you should be getting a correct count of the results. Now, I have to say on this that as far as the results are publication of the results are concerned, we are the ones really pushing the American Embassy to say what we need is for the results to come out. The Ushaidi system is actually built on detecting. It's an early warning system on detecting is there violence in an area. It was initially used in Kenya during the after the post-election violence, and so that's where the concept comes from. So the embassy came in with this as a means to detect if there was going to be trouble in an area. Now we're telling them what we need is results. So I think we're in the process of agreeing on what we're going to get out of the system.
Well, that would be in everybody's interest, so we'll support that. Well, let me thank you very much, Kah, for this wonderful presentation. It's full of information and full of inspiration. We hope things go well, and good luck to you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.